Let's bring in our panelist. Darren Gobb is a retired lieutenant colonel for the United States Army, and Ruthie Blum is a former advisor at the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and an editor at the Jewish News Syndicate. Great to have you both. Thank you.
Welcome, welcome. Well, American hostage Edan Alexander was held hostage for 584 days until President Trump was able to get his release. Your thoughts, Darren?
Yeah, this is turning into quite the incredible story. It's a wonderful thing to see. You know, part of me looks at this from the simple perspective of a parent who, myself, I have two kids who are in their mid to late 20s. And when you think about it just from the human perspective, there's no way to look at this in a negative light. I can't even imagine what that would be like for the parents and grandparents to be able to be reunited in this way. And the second part of it then becomes, you know, what's the geopolitics of this? How did we get here? Well, that's really the Trump effect continuing in the Middle East. And his trip there, this is a goodwill gesture, even though it's not necessarily going to be believed that Hamas is suddenly going to turn into the good guy here. But this is something we've wanted for a long time. It is great to see. But I also think that Netanyahu is right that you cannot let up the pressure on Hamas, regardless of what is going on with the hostages at this point, because they are still not an honest arbiter in these negotiations. Take the hostages, of course, when you can, return them, and continue to fight for, frankly, the people of Gaza and the people of Israel, and just say, you know what, we're not going to let Hamas come back.
It's a great point. And again, Ruthie, it just shows how much Israel and the United States value human life versus Hamas, who literally uses their own people as human shields. Your reaction to Edan's release, as well as next steps in order to bring back the rest of the hostages?
Okay, so first of all, of course, any way anybody can get out of that hellhole in Gaza is welcome. And it is wonderful that President Trump did that, but it wasn't a goodwill gesture on Hamas's part. It was a combination of fear. First of all, fear of Trump. Second, fear of the fact that Israel has begun, and is about to launch another massive ground invasion, and this time not go in and out, but rather any tunnels, any areas in Gaza that the IDF empties out of terrorists and weapons and tunnels, it's going to stay there militarily. That's one thing. So there's a combination of fear from Hamas, and then there's the other factor. Hamas has been brilliant at trying to drive a wedge between people in Israel who are against the government and against Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the others who are not, who believe that a total victory in Gaza is imperative.
Ruthie, let me ask you a quick follow-up. There's been some discussion. In fact, a prior guest on our show here today mentioned that there may be a gap now between President Trump and Mr. Netanyahu. What are your thoughts on what's going on?
Well, first of all, I think that the gap has been exaggerated by ill-wishers on both sides of the ocean here, okay? I think the gap is smaller than it's being presented. But it is true that the United States and Israel, while having very similar goals, similar values, etc., they're not identical. Israel has a set of its own national interests, as does America. So I think the sticking points here are things that haven't happened yet. And what do I mean by that? Iran, for example, Saudi Arabia, for example, and Qatar. I think that Israel it isn't mistrust of Trump. It's mistrust of Iran and Qatar, which, by the way, is Hamas, supports Hamas. So the fact that it's some kind of mediator is ridiculous. And I think that Israelis are concerned that President Trump not be duped by these radical Islamists.
Thank you for clarifying that. And speaking of Saudi Arabia, of course, President Trump is there right now speaking with the Crown Prince for his first major foreign trip of his second term. President Trump reportedly seeking $1 trillion worth of investments in the United States. We also saw Scott Bessent walk out earlier from the royal court. He seemed to be smiling, so that might be a good sign for the investments. But Darren, your thoughts, what do you expect to result from this trip?
Yeah, I think it's continuing Trump's preferred approach to the world, which is to lead with economics rather than military, and to increase trade, and that ultimately is a good thing because trade and economics and these kinds of things can lift everybody up rather than the military, which can be a good ambassador in certain conditions, is not necessarily the first one to should be the first one to lead in all relationships. And I also think this is a continuation of the Abraham Accords, what he started from the beginning, and he's going to work to try to normalize relations as much as he can with as many countries as he can, whether that be between them and the U.S., even though most of them have also said they won't necessarily normalize between them and Israel at this point. That could be something that you see again down the road. And what this also does is therefore isolate Iran more and create more allies potentially against their aspirations through Central Asia and the Middle East. So I like the approach right now. I think the investments are a good way to go, and I hope they continue. I'd like to see what this looks like when it's all said and done, because I do believe the end result will be positive.
Very good, yeah. Ruthie, obviously as a follow-up, what do you see coming out of the Saudi Arabia trip with President Trump and a lot of his administration there, as well as what do you think on the agenda item? Sure, there's maybe 10. Where do you think Iran is on that list?
Okay, so first of all, Iran, unfortunately, I really don't believe that Iran is capable of making any deal that doesn't involve its ability, covertly or overtly, to develop nuclear weapons. That's number one. Now, as for Saudi Arabia and the Abraham Accords, it's even been said in Washington, there is no such thing as Abraham Accords without Israel. The name Abraham Accords came from the children of Abraham normalizing relations. So if Israel is not part of a deal like that with Saudi Arabia, then it's not called part of the Abraham Accords. But I think there is concern that if the United States allows Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium for civilian use, which means that in the future it could for weapons, and if Saudi Arabia gets what it wants, it's possible that it'll have no interest then in normalizing relations with Israel. So a lot is in the balance here right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, it's incredibly important what comes out of these meetings, and President Trump is a key part of this negotiation process, just as he was with respect to India and Pakistan. But we have to leave it there. Darren Gobb, Ruthie Blum, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.